The $500,000 purse number that just leaked out of Atlanta is the single most damaging piece of paperwork this sport has produced in years, and the fighter at the center of it doesn't want to talk about it. Claressa Shields, two-time Olympic gold medalist, multi-time undisputed middleweight champion, the woman who has spent the last 18 months walking around this sport claiming she gets a guaranteed $2 million every single time she laces up the gloves, just got caught in a lie that every commission filing, every promoter handshake, and every undercard opponent's check stub can now disprove in writing. And the part that should genuinely frighten the people who still ride for her is not the number itself. The part that should frighten them is the name of the woman on the other side of the ring. Kaye Scott. A 42-year-old opponent that the boxing internet spent 2 weeks calling a tomato can before the bell even rang. Kaye Scott, according to figures reportedly filed with the Georgia Athletic and Entertainment Commission, was paid less than $70,000 to step into State Farm Arena in Atlanta on August 15th, get beat down for 6 rounds, and have a towel and a backup towel thrown in to save her from her own corner. $700,000 total difference between the headliner and the co-main on a single commission disclosure sheet, signed, dated, and sitting in a state folder that any journalist, any podcaster, any blogger with a phone can pull up. This is not gossip. This is not a rumor that started on a Twitter thread at 2 in the morning. This is a paper trail that just ended the greatest hype campaign women's boxing has ever seen, and the people who got paid to pretend it was real are now standing in the breeze trying to figure out which way to run. I am going to walk you through every layer of this thing today, layer by layer, the surface receipts that first caught fire on social media, the insider reaction from people close to the camp, the business deal sitting underneath that nobody wants to talk about, the contract structure that explains exactly why Claressa Shields is going viral every single week, and the future moves that will make this story even bigger over the next 6 months. By the time we get to the bottom of this, you are going to understand why the fighter standing next to her on the undercard was paid less than 1/7 of what Claressa publicly claims she earns, why the women on the MVP roster were right to call her out, why the Salita Promotions resume is starting to look thinner than any honest promoter in the room will admit out loud, and why the entire internet economy that now runs on Claressa Shields' content, the YouTube channels, the TikTok breakdowns, the Substacks, the podcasts, all of it is built on a number that the state of Georgia just proved is not real. So buckle up, because we have so much to cover today, and trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming up next. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. Let me set the table for you before we walk through the receipts, because a lot of people who only got into this story in the last 48 hours are still operating with the wrong picture of what actually went down in Atlanta. On August 15, 2026, Claressa Shields stepped through the ropes at State Farm Arena in Atlanta, Georgia, to defend the WBC and WBA Unified Middleweight World Championships against a woman named Kaye Scott. The card was promoted by Salita Promotions, the same company run by Dimitri Salita that has been booking Claressa's fights since her professional debut. The card was streamed on DAZN, the international subscription platform that most casual fans think of as the Netflix of combat sports. The venue was officially listed at a sold-out 17,000-plus capacity, with State Farm Arena's own social media accounts boasting an almost $2.5 million gate for the live event. This, on paper, was Claressa Shields' biggest night of her professional career, a homecoming on a Saturday night in front of a packed American arena, broadcast globally, against an undefeated mandatory challenger, headlining the most stacked female card her promoter has ever built around her. But here is the part the broadcast graphics did not show. A few days before the fight, a Georgia Athletic and Entertainment Commission purse disclosure sheet began circulating on social media, primarily through an X post by Goodman, who reports for the channel Punch Drunk Boxing and has sourced multiple commission filings over the past year. That disclosure sheet, which Georgia is one of the few states in the country that still publicly releases for combat sports events, showed Claressa Shields' fight purse at $500,000 flat and Kaye Scott's fight purse at a number that multiple outlets, including Punch Drunk Boxing and Goodman's reporting, placed below $70,000. The internet did what the internet does. Cris Cyborg posted a video dissecting the disclosure sheet and used it to go right back at Claressa for ducking a real super fight. Channels that had been telling their audience for over a year that Claressa was worth 8-figure guarantees were suddenly filming reaction videos calling the same fighter a liar. And the woman at the center of it, Claressa Shields, went silent on the purse question, then started posting about fried rice, tattoos, and Pat. while her promoter Dmitry Salita posted a single congratulatory X thread praising her performance and never once addressed the number on the commission sheet. I need you to understand why that silence matters, because this is not the first time the Claressa Shields income story has been told. In November 2025, Claressa herself stood at a press conference on camera in front of reporters from ESPN, Reuters, the Detroit News, and Mid-Michigan Now, and announced she had just signed what she described as a historic minimum guaranteed $8 million multi-fight partnership with Salita Promotions and Win Records. She specifically stated, on the record, that the deal included a $3 million signing bonus before she even got inside the ring. She framed it as the moment women's boxing had finally arrived. She framed it, in those very press conference words, as the 2-year deal that proved she had always been worth more than the men who refused to share cards with her. Reuters, AP, and ESPN all confirmed the $8 million headline number. That headline went around the world. And now the same fighter, the same promoter, and the same deal are sitting at $500,000 for the marquee fight of the contract, with the mandatory challenger pulling in less than half of 1/8 of the supposed headline guarantee. Do you understand how catastrophic that math is? On paper, Claressa was supposed to clear at least the $3 million signing bonus alone before any fight purse was even negotiated. On paper, the first fight of the $8 million machine should have produced a 7-figure disclosed purse because the contract publicly claims a minimum guarantee. Instead, the first fight disclosed at $500,000. That is not a rounding error. That is the gap between the marketing campaign and the actual contract. Now, the receipts themselves. Layer 1. Surface evidence. The first thing you need to see is what actually got filed with the Georgia Athletic and Entertainment Commission, because this is the layer of evidence that the most people can verify on their own. Georgia is one of the very few states in the United States that still actively publishes disclosed fight purses for combat sports events. The Georgia Athletic Commission's own administrative code, Chapter 85 to one of the Georgia Rules and Regulations, governs how those purses are reported, with specific provisions for arrangements on any purse greater than $50,000 that have to be mutually agreed to by promoter and commission. California, by contrast, has been disclosing UFC pay for years, and the comparison points are useful. Merab Dvalishvili's UFC fights have routinely disclosed in the multiple hundred thousands range, and the gap between disclosed and rumored paid figures has been one of the most analyzed topics in MMA for a decade. Boxing in Georgia has a similar dynamic. The numbers that get filed are not necessarily the final numbers, but they're the numbers the promoter signs under penalty of commission sanction. They are, in other words, the most legally meaningful numbers in the entire deal. The disclosure reportedly filed by Salita Promotions for the August 15th card showed Claressa Shields at $500,000, Kaye Scott at a figure between $50,000 and $70,000 based on the version of the document circulating on social media, and the undercard fights all in the low to mid 5-figure range, with the marquee co-feature of Troy Isley versus Joseph Hicks reportedly disclosing in the $25,000 to $40,000 zone. Punch Drunk Boxing, the channel that publishes commission filings as a regular segment on their programs, took the lead on surfacing the document, with Goodman driving most of the original reporting. The Barclays Center card, the MSG card, the YouTube Theater cards, none of them get this kind of attention, because Georgia is the only major state still doing it in this format. The moment the filing hit X, the receipts piled up fast. Cris Cyborg, who has been trying to lure Claressa into a boxing match for over a year and has publicly dangled a $2 million purse offer to make the fight happen, posted a reaction video specifically dissecting the disclosure sheet, calling out the $500,000 number and asking Claressa directly why the supposed $8 million deal was disclosing at less than 1/6 of its claimed signing bonus alone. Cris Cyborg's post is important because Cyborg is a fighter who is being offered her own purses. She has direct standing in the conversation, and she has been one of the most consistent voices pointing out that Claressa has, for months, been presenting herself as a 9-figure brand when her disclosed purses do not match that presentation. The second surface evidence piece is the comparison number. Alicia Baumgardner, the fighter Claressa was banned from most valuable promotions events for physically confronting earlier this year, reportedly disclosed in a similar $500,000 to $750,000 range on her last major fight before she signed with MVP. Baumgardner, a fighter most casual fans would struggle to name on the street, was paid the same disclosed figure as the supposed biggest female boxer in the history of the sport. And Baumgartner's salary structure has been openly discussed as a clear sign of how MVP, Jake Paul's promotional company, is choosing to invest real money in women's boxing rather than running on hype. That contrast is important because it removes the Claressa is underpaid because women's boxing isn't valued talking point. Women's boxing is being valued. Female fighters are getting paid. Claressa just isn't the only one getting paid, and she isn't even the highest. The third surface evidence piece is the venue math. State Farm Arena, the home of the Atlanta Hawks, holds roughly 17 to 19,000 for boxing configurations. The fight card's own social posts from State Farm Arena advertised a sold-out attendance of 15,369 and a gate of almost $1.5 million for the original on-sale figure, with a later expansion to 19,721 seats sold and a $2.63 million revised gate. If you do the simple math, a gate of $2.5 million, plus sponsorship revenue, plus DAZN subscription value, plus international rights, the promoter is sitting on several $million in gross event revenue. From that gross, Claressa's disclosed $500,000 is the largest single fighter line item. That makes sense at a structural level. But it also means the $8 million contract referenced at the press conference is not actually a per-fight payout structure. It is a multi-fight aggregate that includes back-end, bonuses, sponsorship participation, and likely participation in the promoter-owned Win Records operation. That back-end structure, which we will get into during the deep analysis section, is where the real story is. And the fourth critical piece of surface evidence is what happened immediately after the fight ended. Claressa stopped discussing the purse. Her promoter Dimitri Salita posted an X thread praising her performance, calling it an absolute masterclass, talking about the titles, and calling her a level above, but he did not address the disclosed purse, did not address the Cris Cyborg videos, did not address the punch-drunk boxing report, and did not address the obvious math problem with the supposed $8 million deal. Her longtime promoter partner, the man who according to multiple outlets receives a cut of her purse as part of the standard promoter-fighter agreement structure, went completely silent on the only question the entire boxing internet was asking. And that silence is itself a piece of evidence. Because when a number is real, the promoter defends the number. When a number is a marketing line, the promoter changes the subject. So before we keep walking through, let me pause here. Because I think we need to set the record straight on what the boxing public is actually feeling right now and what the people who are still riding for Claressa are going to have to answer for in the days ahead. The narrative they were sold was that Claressa Shields is the GWAT, the greatest woman of all time, that she signed a record-breaking deal, that she was finally going to be paid like the superstar she always claimed she was, and that the rest of the sport should fall in line or get out of her way. The narrative they were handed from the Georgia Commission is that Claressa was paid $500,000 for the first fight of that deal, that her opponent was paid less than $70,000, that the same opponent was widely mocked online in the weeks leading up to the fight as a fake opponent and a mismatch, and that the entire business structure of the deal depends on Claressa staying loud enough to keep the content cycle burning. The truth, as it almost always does in this sport, was hiding in a state commission filing that the promoter never wanted the public to see. And oh, do I have more for you? The stands are really not going to like this part, because we are about to walk straight into the cultural reaction layer, and this is where the pattern starts to repeat in a way that nobody, not the Claressa fans, not the casual viewers, not even the most active promoters on social media, can dismiss as isolated noise. Kaye Scott is a name most boxing fans had never heard of 3 weeks before fight night. She is a 42-year-old out of the regional amateur circuit. She took the fight on short notice. She disputed the towel stoppage publicly. Her own corner was throwing the towel in because she was absorbing punishment that was no longer competitive, and the backup towel, plus a face cloth, jumped in to save her from further damage. The fight itself was not in serious dispute. But the disclosure numbers mean that the boxing public now has a name to attach to the gap. Kaye Scott is the human illustration of the contract structure. She is the line item the marketing campaign did not want anyone thinking about. The cultural evidence starts with the Cris Cyborg reaction chain, because Cris Cyborg is the cleanest case study of what is happening at the insider level. Cris Cyborg has been trying to make a boxing match with Claressa Shields happen since at least mid-2025. She publicly offered a $2 million purse for the fight. She publicly insisted the fight could happen at a catch weight. She publicly stated Claressa's team refused because, in their framing, the purse was beneath Claressa's commercial value. Cris Cyborg's entire pitch to the public for the last 18 months has been that Claressa is ducking real fights because the purses being offered are the actual market purses, and the Claressa marketing line is the inflated number. Now the Georgia Commission has put a number on the table that backs Cyborg's analysis up. Cyborg's reaction post is not a random hater pile-on. It is the closing argument of a year-long argument. When she posts the Georgia Commission document next to a screenshot of Claressa's press conference claim, she is not insulting Claressa. She is contrasting two public documents and asking which one the public is going to believe. The second cultural layer is the Alicia Baumgardner connection, and this one cuts deeper because it is a fighter-on-fighter contrast inside the same weight class. Baumgardner is the WBC and WBO super featherweight champion. She signed with Most Valuable Promotions, the Jake Paul-backed promotional outfit, after her own split with her previous promoter. MVP has publicly built a women's boxing pipeline around her that includes undisputed middleweight fights, pay-per-view co-features on Jake Paul cards, and reportedly seven-figure offers to potential opponents that would headline MVP cards. Baumgardner has not personally attacked Claressa, but the structural contrast is now unavoidable. MVP is paying its female champions. Salita Promotions is paying its female champion $500,000 for a sold-out 17,000-seat arena gate. And Claressa was reportedly banned from MVP events after the Baumgardner confrontation. That is a real-world piece of evidence. A fighter who was good enough to headline an MVP card, who turned it down, who was then banned, who then publicly framed her Salita deal as superior to anything MVP could offer, and whose first disclosed purse under the Salita deal was $500,000. The third cultural layer is the podcast and YouTube ecosystem, and this is the part that I want to be very direct with you about because it is not just entertainment. It is a content economy. The channels that have made a living covering Claressa Shields, channels that monetize her every move, every quote, every Instagram post, every podcast appearance, all of them, every single one, are now reporting on a story that calls their own perpetual coverage into question. Because the reason the Claressa content economy works is that she is famously loud on social media. She posts almost daily. She calls out other fighters by name. She promises purses she does not have. She publicly fights with promoters. She sets up controversy cycles on a weekly basis. And the content channels turn that controversy cycle into thumbnails, into shorts, into reactions, into podcast segments. The content economy is symbiotic. Claressa creates the spectacle. The content channels turn the spectacle into revenue. The channels that most aggressively built their audiences on the Claressa cycle are now facing a moment where their audience is asking whether the entire spectacle was manufactured on numbers that the commission filings prove were not real. The fourth cultural layer is the Claressa fanbase itself, and this is the part that the algorithm hates, but the sport needs to hear. There are real fans of Claressa Shields. They have supported her since the Olympics. They watched her become a two-time gold medalist. They watched her turn professional and try to build a women's middleweight division through sheer force of personality. They have a real reason to root for her, and they have a real emotional investment in defending her whenever the criticism gets loud. But the fanbase is now being asked to defend a number that the Georgia Athletic and Entertainment Commission has put on a state document. They cannot defend that number with another number because no other number exists. They cannot defend it with a contract clause because the contract clause has not been produced. They cannot defend it with a back-end structure because Claressa's own team has gone silent on the back-end structure. The fanbase can defend the fighting. They can defend the record. They can defend the Olympic medals. They cannot defend the purse math. And that means the cultural layer has decisively shifted. Now I want to stop and acknowledge one thing, because it would be cheap and dishonest to pretend this is not a real moment for the people in Claressa's corner. There is a version of the argument where the contract is genuinely structured as a multi-fight aggregate, where the $500,000 disclosed purse is the minimum for a non-pay-per-view domestic card, and where the 4 fight nights under the deal include a pay-per-view main event, a Jake Paul co-feature opportunity that she eventually took or turned down, and a series of back-end payouts through win records that may genuinely total up to $8 million over the full contract life. I am not dismissing that version. I am pointing out that version has not been produced publicly by any party to the contract. Not by Salita. Not by Win Records. Not by Claressa's own management team. And until that version is produced, the public number that exists, the number the Georgia Commission filed, the number Punch Drunk Boxing surfaced, the number Cris Cyborg is highlighting in her posts, is the only number the public has to work with. And that thing, That gear shift from speculation to fact structure is what I want to take you into now, because this is where the surface cultural noise stops being the story and the business structure starts being the story. And if you have made it to this point in the video, you are about to understand something most casual fans will never dig into on their own. Pattern interrupt. We are no longer talking about who won the fight. We are no longer talking about whether Kaye Scott was a real opponent or a hand-picked mismatch. We are no longer talking about Cris Cyborg or Alicia Baumgardner or Pat or fried rice or any of the noise. We are now talking about the contract structure that produced the noise, the promoter business model that incentivizes the noise, and the media economy that monetizes the noise. And that is a fundamentally different conversation. The first systemic angle is the 360 deal structure. A 360 deal, in modern promoter language, is a contract structure where the promoter is entitled to a percentage not just of the fighter's fight purses, but of every meaningful revenue stream connected to the fighter's brand sponsorship income, appearance fees, content revenue, merchandise sales, music publishing, and in some cases a cut of endorsement deals directly negotiated by the fighter. The standard structure in women's boxing 360 deals involves a promoter taking anywhere from 25 to 50% of gross ancillary income on top of the standard promoter cut of the fight purse itself. Win Records, the production and content label that sits alongside Salita Promotions in the contractual structure publicly announced at Claressa's November 2025 press conference, is not a music label in the traditional sense. It is a production house attached to the promotion that produces content surrounding Claressa's fights, her training camp, her lifestyle segments, and her appearance-driven income. If Win Records is structured as a 360 partner, and if Claressa's contract is structured as a 360 deal, then every sponsorship dollar, every appearance fee, every brand deal, every social media post monetized through revenue streams generated by her name and likeness gets divided before any of it lands in Claressa's actual payout account. That is the structural reason, and I want to be very clear that this is structural analysis based on publicly announced deal terms, not insider reporting on the private contract, that Claressa is incentivized to remain loud on social media, to call out other fighters by name, to generate weekly controversy, and to keep the content cycle feeding the channels that monetize her. Because the louder she stays, the more her ancillary revenue grows, the more her brand value to the 360 partnership grows, and the more her promoter side cut becomes meaningful income for the people holding the contract on the promoter side. Her purse number is fixed. Her content volume is variable. And the contract is structured to reward maximizing the variable. The second systemic angle is the promoter cut structure itself. When a fight purse is paid, it does not land in the fighter's bank account as the disclosed number. It is sliced into multiple pieces that the boxing public almost never sees laid out on a single document. There is the trainer's cut, typically running between 10 and 20% of the gross purse. There is the manager's cut, typically running between 5 and 15%. There is the cutman's fee, the strength and conditioning coach's fee, the nutritionist's fee, the sparring partner's fee, the legal team's fee, the tax attorney's fee, and the tax obligation itself, which in Claressa's case, as a Michigan-based professional, would be subject to both federal and state withholding on fight purses. The fighter's disclosed purse is the gross headline number. The fighter's actual realized income from any single fight night is the disclosed purse minus all of those slices, minus self-employment tax, minus state and federal income tax, minus professional licensing fees and commission sanction fees. Inside a 360 deal with multi-promoter partnerships, that realized income can be substantially smaller than the disclosed headline number, sometimes by half or more. This is genuinely serious business analysis, and it is why the disclosed numbers in this fight matter. The $500,000 number on the Georgia Commission filing is not the $500,000 Claressa is going to write a check on. It is the gross from which every contractually obligated slice is taken. When the contract is publicly framed as an $8 million guaranteed deal, and when the same contract's first disclosed fight gross is $500,000, the public has to do the only math that is honest, which is to assume the $8 million is a multi-fight aggregate, not a per-fight number, and to ask whether the aggregate after all contractually obligated slices will actually clear the headline value for the fighter herself. The third systemic angle is the media amplification structure. This is where we have to talk about the content channels that built their entire subscriber base on the Claressa Shields content cycle. Channels like ours, like the Punch Drunk Boxing Operation, like the other boxing commentary channels that post reaction content to Claressa's every move. Every channel making meaningful monthly revenue from the Claressa content cycle has a structural incentive to keep the cycle running. If Claressa goes quiet, the thumbnails go cold. If the thumbnails go cold, watch time drops. If watch time drops, the channel's AdSense income contracts. There is no conspiracy here. There is just a basic economic alignment between a promoter that benefits from controversy, a fighter who benefits from controversy, and a media ecosystem that monetizes controversy. And when all three of those forces are pointed at the same person in the same news cycle, the result is exactly what we are seeing right now, a $500,000 fight purse becoming one of the most watched storylines in the sport. Because every layer of the system benefits from keeping it loud. The fourth systemic angle, and this is the one I think honest promoters in the room need to wrestle with, is the matchmaking structure. Kaye Scott was selected as a mandatory challenger. The WBC's mandatory challenger process imposes a real obligation on a title holder to face its ranked contender within a defined window. But mandatory challengers can be voluntary or they can be imposed. The question of whether Salita Promotions actively pursued Kaye Scott as a manageable opponent or whether the WBC imposed the fight is structurally relevant because the disclosed purse split between a champion and a mandatory challenger is one of the cleanest signals of promoter leverage. When the champion is paid 7 to 10 times what the challenger is paid on a mandatory title fight, that gap is a clean signal of promoter control. It means the promoter had significant leverage in negotiating the challenger side, because no challenger side promoter was able to push the purse higher. In this case, the gap is roughly 7 to 1. That gap, in plain English, tells the public that Salita Promotions had the leverage in the challenger side's purse negotiation, and the matchmaking may have been significantly more controlled than the broadcast graphics implied. So now, with all four systemic angles laid out, let me take you to the major truth bomb. Because this is the moment that the entire video has been building toward, and I want to walk through it slowly because it deserves the room. The truth bomb is this. The Claressa Shields $8 million deal, as publicly announced and as publicly filed in its first disclosed fight purse, is not the deal Claressa's promotional materials have been describing. It is not a per-fight structure that has Claressa clearing multiple millions every time she fights. It is not a structure that meaningfully differentiates Claressa's compensation from peers like Alicia Baumgardner, Savannah Marshall, or Katie Taylor at the disclosed purse level. It is a multi-fight aggregate that, according to the only publicly verifiable number on file, generated a $500,000 disclosed purse for the first fight of the deal, at an event where the same promoter sold 17,000 tickets, grossed $2.5 million at the gate, and locked in a global DAZN broadcast window. The fighter's reported contract headline was $8 million. The disclosed purse was $500,000. The opponent was paid less than $70,000. The promoter is still on the same money. The manager is still on the same money. The trainer, the command, the strength coach, the tax attorney, the nutritionist, all of them take their slice from the disclosed gross, not from the headline contract value. Claressa's realized take-home from Fight 1 is, by any honest estimate, a fraction of the headline number, and that fraction is competitive with, and in some cases inferior to, what MVP's comparable fighters were already clearing in disclosed purses before the Salita deal was even announced. That is the truth bomb. That is the moment the entire story collapses into a single sentence. And the reason that sentence matters is not because of the dollar amount. The dollar amount is a number. Numbers can be argued. The reason that sentence matters is because it proves that the marketing campaign surrounding Claressa Shields' commercial value has been running at a multiple of the actual disclosed compensation. The public was sold a fighter worth $8 million. The public was handed a fight purse worth $500,000. The gap between those two numbers is the distance between the brand and the business. And the gap is being filled right now with weekly social media noise that props up the brand for the benefit of every downstream economic partner except Claressa's realized income. And here is where I want to give credit where credit is due, because the sport deserves balance. The fighter in this story, who actually handled the contract structure correctly, and whose behavior under the bright lights of public disclosure deserves to be highlighted, is Alicia Baumgardner. Alicia Baumgardner walked away from a previous promotional setup that was undervaluing her. She signed with Most Valuable Promotions. She took a publicly disclosed purse in the same $500,000 to $750,000 range that Claressa's deal put her at, and she did so without claiming a multi-million-dollar per fight headline. She did not call out every other fighter in her weight class. She did not generate weekly controversy cycles to prop up her content value. She did not stage theatrics on camera. She showed up. She fought. She signed the disclosure documents. She let the promoter put the real number on file. And when the commission published the real number, she did not have to defend it, because the real number was the number her team had been telling the public all along. That is what a clean structure looks like. That is what a fighter whose contract is structured to actually pay the fighter looks like. And that is the contrast that the entire Claressa Shields story has now made impossible to ignore. The hero resolution of this story is therefore not a single fighter. It is a structural principle. The fighters who win in this sport, on a long enough timeline, are the fighters who negotiate a contract whose disclosed numbers match the headlines and who fight the fights their contract obligates them to fight without generating weekly noise cycles to prop up ancillary revenue. The fighters who lose are the fighters who allow a promotional structure to build their brand on numbers that the commissions cannot defend in a public filing. Claressa Shields' commercial upper hand is real. She is a multi-time undisputed champion. She is a 2-time Olympic gold medalist. She has won major fights at multiple weight classes, and there is no honest way to take any of that away from her. But commercial upper hand is not the same as commercial payout. And when the gap between upper hand and payout becomes the central story of the news cycle, the fighter loses control of her own narrative, because the people who control the narrative are now the commissions, the promoters, and the content channels, none of whom have a structural interest in protecting a brand that is under contract scrutiny. And that is where I want to land on the optimistic note, because I do believe the sport ultimately corrects. The correction in women's boxing is already happening. MVP is paying real money. Top Rank is paying real money. Matchroom is paying real money. The fighters who are loud on social media and quiet on disclosed pay are the fighters the sport is moving past. The fighters who are loud on disclosed pay and professional on social media are the fighters who are pulling the entire sport forward. Claressa Shields has the talent to be in that second group. Whether she ends up there depends entirely on whether her next disclosed purse filings look more like the $8 million deal she has publicly claimed, or more like the $500,000 fight the Georgia Commission has put on file. This is only the start, because the next 6 months are going to be louder. Claressa has publicly stated she intends to fight again in early 2026, with multiple speculated opponents including Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano, in a potential cross-promotional mega-fight, a rematch with Savannah Marshall, and a potential Cris Cyborg crossover that would generate its own media cycle. Every one of those fights will produce a new commission filing. Every new commission filing will be scrutinized by punch-drunk boxing, by the channels that have built audiences on this kind of analysis, and by the broader boxing public that now understands exactly what to look for. And every new commission filing will either confirm the $500,000 structure as the real deal, or it will reveal the $8 million aggregate math for the first time. And the public will finally see the back-end structure that has not yet been publicly produced. There is also the second shoe waiting to drop on the Kaye Scott side. Kaye Scott has reportedly indicated through her own camp that she is interested in pursuing another major fight after the Atlanta exposure. If a promoter with a real budget, an MVP, a Top Rank, a Matchroom, picks up Kaye Scott and puts her on a card with a disclosed purse in the 7-figure range, the contrast with her Atlanta payday will be the most viral sports business story of the year. The current champion versus challenger leverage documented in the Atlanta disclosure is the cleanest signal yet of how promoter control over mandatory challenger bookings can depress real market pay for the working fighters. If that story gets picked up by a major outlet, it puts pressure on every promoter in the sport to defend their challenger side purses, and that pressure is good for the sport. And there is a third shoe still to drop. The original Cris Cyborg pursuit of Claressa Shields, the $2 million purse offer, the catch weight proposal, the publicly stated willingness to make the fight under multiple structural frameworks, is still on the table. If Cyborg's team publicly produces their offer documentation and pushes the fight to a formal announcement, the public will have, for the first time, 2 verified purse numbers side by side, the Cyborg offer and the Georgia Commission filing. And the contrast will be unanswerable. If you have stayed with me this long, you now understand why I have been spending the time on this story, and why I think the next 3 months in women's boxing are going to produce more verifiable commission filings, more clean payroll contrasts, and more genuine structural corrections than the previous 3 years combined. Subscribe, because the next commission filing is going to drop at the worst possible time for the Claressa Shields promotional narrative, and we are going to be the channel that walks you through every layer of it as it happens. The next video on this channel is going to break down why Katie Taylor's last disclosed purse proves women's boxing is being valued at 7 figures per fight when the contract structure is real, and why the same number going through a 360 deal structure turns the 7-figure offering into a 5-figure take-home. That is the deeper cut. That is the breakdown the rest of the sports commentary space is going to avoid. And that breakdown is going to be the next video. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me whether you think the disclosed purse numbers are bigger than the contract headline, or vice versa. Tell me whether you think Claressa's promoter will ever publicly produce the full contract. Tell me whether you think Kaye Scott is going to land a real 7-figure offer from a competing promotional outfit within the next 9 months. I read every comment. And the conversation in those comment threads is going to drive the next video on this channel. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it.